German national character. A couple of titles of some of his books: Folklore Matters, as he usually does, Interpreting Folklore, and most recent is a 4-volume work, 1,457 pages, published by Routledge, called Folklore, Critical Concepts in Literary and Cultural Studies. 4 volumes. He's often quoted by journalists on anything from the meaning and significance of the latest urban legend to why people in Berkeley are objecting to changing, to the phone company changing the area code to 512. He's a frequent speaker at diverse academic disciplines, events held by them, as well as the public. We're competing with him with UC Berkeley's homecoming to have him here today, for example. I met Alan Dundes 41 years, 5 months, and 2 days ago. When I was an undergraduate student at the University of Kansas, in my freshman year, I heard about this terrific folklore course being taught by a visiting professor from Indiana University named Sid Thompson. My second year, I heard about this terrific folklore course taught by a visiting professor from Indiana by the name of Butler Law. And my third year, many people told me about this terrific course, folklore taught by this professor from Indiana named Alan Dundes. I made an appointment to see Alan Dundes at the very end of the spring semester in 1963. He was just completing an interview with a Potawatomi who was telling him stories about Petit Jean. When the interview was concluded, and I introduced myself to Alan, I said I had heard about this course for 3 years, was very excited about taking it. And he said, well, I won't be here. I've accepted an offer from UC Berkeley. I was crestfallen. He followed it with, however, University of Kansas has hired a professor from Indiana who's completing his dissertation this summer, Robert Georges. So I had my first course that fall from Georges. Went on to Indiana, where else would I go? And while there, all I heard was Alan Dundes this and Alan Dundes that. I, on one occasion, went to the recent periodicals room in the library. Looking through the Folklore journals, articles with Folklore by Alan Dundes, Fabula by Alan Dundes, his Journal of American Folklore, an article on folklore and anthropology and literature. Some of the stories that I heard the Potawatomi telling me in this article. That moved on to other publications in the library, just to see what's in them. There's an education journal, an article by Alan Dundes. Meteorology, weather superstitions by Alan Dundes. He has by now authored at least 500 papers and articles. Some of you may recall an article published in Journal of American Folklore in the early 1970s by Richard Royce, titled, yes you do, titled, That Can't Be Alan Dundes. Alan Dundes is taller than that. Folklore about folklorists. While Alan Dundes is indeed a giant in the field of folkloristics, and beyond, he was recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences as folklorist. He's so honored. So we'll be speaking to us today on international folkloristics in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming a person who needs no introduction. Alan Dundes.
Not all of that was true, but I accept it. First, I want to thank Mike for inviting me to this plenary meeting and also Tim Lloyd for helping make the arrangements. It's nice to be back at this annual recharging of mental batteries, and hope you all have had that experience. I also want to thank all the well-wishers who, upon hearing about Berkeley, logically but wrongly assumed I was retiring. I thank you very much for the good wishes, unless it's wishful thinking. But I am not retired, and I am anxiously awaiting the arrival of one of the most scintillating minds in our society, probably the top anthropological folklorist, Charles Briggs, whom I hope will be on board in the next year or so, and I then can think about retiring, although I don't really. But as you know, the only way we could really get another appointment, which is basically a mortgage against mine, was that a former student sent a personal check, made out to the university, but with the indication it was for my use, for $1 million. I didn't know this. And I established a chair in Folklore to kind of force the administration to hire somebody. You can't have a chair in a field and have nobody in it. So that's one technique I recommend. Now, speaking of former students, this former student, of course, is not either an academic or a public except for Folklore. Obviously, he couldn't possibly have sent a personal check for $1 million if he were. But I kind of like all my former students to think about this as a model. And if you'll indulge me for a minute, I'd like all my former and present students to hold up their hands just for 1 minute. While we're in the front row, and they got stuff to throw, so anyway, I'm glad to see many of you, and I'm still writing letters to a lot of you. So I guess I can't retire quite yet until the job market improves. Now, the state of folkloristics at the beginning of the 21st century is, I think, depressingly worrisome. Graduate programs in folklore around the world have been disestablished or seriously weakened. The once celebrated program at the University of Copenhagen no longer exists. Folklore programs in Germany have changed their title in an effort to become ethnology centered. Even in Helsinki, the veritable mecca of folklore research, the name of the graduate program at the University of Helsinki has been changed. According to the website, it's the Department of Folklore Studies, along with the Departments of Ethnology, Cultural Anthropology, and Archaeology, belong administratively to the Faculty of Arts and the Institute of Cultural Research. What's happened? The latter title to me sounds suspiciously like cultural studies. I know there are cultural studies fans among you, but to me it consists of literary types who would like to be cultural anthropologists. And I hate to think of folklore as being grouped with such wannabes. Here in the United States, the situation is even worse. I'm writing the hand a little bit here. UCLA's doctoral program in folklore and mythology has been subsumed under the unlikely rubric of world arts and cultures, WAC, without the Y. And the folklore doctorate has been reduced to one of several options in that expansion of what was formerly a department of dance. The doctoral program in folklore and folklife at Penn has virtually collapsed and may not recover unless there's an infusion of new faculty. And Dan spoke about this last night at the Penn meeting. And even Indiana University, the acknowledged bastion and beacon of folklore study in the U.S., has seen fit to combine folklore with ethnomusicology into one administrative unit. As a result, there is no longer a purely separate, independent doctoral program in folklore per se anywhere in the United States. A sad situation, in my view. And some may feel that these administrative shifts are nothing more than a reflection of the name-changing discussion arising from those among you who have expressed unhappiness with the term folklore as the name of our discipline. Regina Bendix was quite right when she made the astute observation that the very coining of the term folklore by Tomes was itself a case of name-changing. from popular antiquities, the Latinate construction, to the Anglo-Saxon folklore. But I believe she was sadly mistaken when she claimed that part of the disrepute of the field was caused by using the same term folklore for the subject matter and the name of the discipline. This is, in my opinion, a red herring, a non-problem which was perfectly well solved by several 19th century folklorists, including Reinhold Kaler, who in 1887 distinguished between folklore, the subject matter, and folkloristics, the study of that subject matter. And the term folkloristics goes back to the 1880s at the very least. Yet in 1996, we have folklorist Eric Montagnol informing us, quote, of course the term folkloristics is quite modern in comparison to folklore. The distinction between the discipline and the subject material and the appropriate term for each came into discussion in the 1980s. Until that time, folklore referred to both the subject and the discipline which studied it. One more reason for confusion, that was 1996. I think he was probably referring to Bruce Jackson's equally uninformed note in JAF in 1985, in which he complains about the term folkloristics and proposes that it be banned, as if anyone could possibly legislate language usage. Jackson quotes Roger Abrams' claim that I invented the term as a joke. I certainly did not. On December 7, 1889, American folklorist Charles G. Leland, 1834 to 1903, in an address greeting the newly formed Hungarian Folklore Society, that's even before Linda, spoke of the folkloristic as one of the most profound developments in history. So, folkloristics is the study of folklore just as linguistics is the study of language, and it has been for more than a century, even if parochial American folklorists are not aware of the fact. Yuri Sokolov's textbook Russian Folklore, first published in 1938, recognizes the distinction, and the valuable first chapter of the book is entitled, quote, The Nature of Folklore and the Problems of Folkloristics. The Sokolov uses was pointed out by Barbara K.G. in her 1985 rebuttal note, Die Folkloristik, a good Yiddish word, also in JAF. She also remarked that Auke Hultkrantz, in his important general ethnological concepts, 1960, used folkloristic as a synonym for, quote, the science of folklore. So the distinction between folklore and folkloristics is hardly a new idea, and I stated, or if you like, restated it, as clearly as I could in my prefatory What is Folklore in the edited book The Study of Folklore, published in 1965. I regret that neither Venomos or Oring reiterated this important distinction between folkloristics and folklore in their otherwise excellent spirited defense of the discipline in their respective 1998 essays in JAF. But in contrast, I was pleased that Bob Georges and Mike Jones entitled their useful textbook Folkloristics, an Introduction, and they stressed the distinction between folklore and folkloristics on the very first page. Jan Brunvand, our local hero folklorist, did not include the term in the first edition of his mainstream textbook, The Study of American Folklore, that first appeared in 1968. But by the second edition, 1978, he decided to include the term on the first page of the book, and it has remained in later editions, 1986 and 1998, as referring to the study of folklore, but he insisted on placing quotation marks, which you know about from this meeting, which suggests he was not altogether comfortable with the term. I have, however, noted the increasing usage of the term folkloristics in recent scholarship, and I believe it bodes well. Now, I'm not suggesting we change the name of the American Folklore Society to Folkloristic Society of America, to parallel the Linguistic Society of America. Rather, the critical question remaining is, why folkloristics, the academic study of folklore, a subject that should be part of every major university and college curricular offerings, is in such obvious decline. Another related sad sign, which I was reminded of here in the book exhibit, is the unfortunate demise of the journal Southern Folklore, the successor to the older Southern Folklore Quarterly. This was once a major folklore periodical in the U.S., and I keep hoping that an enterprising folklorist at one of our many great Southern colleges and universities will resuscitate this journal. I think there are reasons for the decline, and I also think that some of the responsibility for the decline lies in part with the membership of the American Folklore Society, myself included. I suspect that some of you now are thinking that I've merely endorsed the scandalously discouraging essay that appeared in Lingua Franca in October of 1997 that made the dire prediction that, quote, folklore as an autonomous discipline and pen may well be doomed. This essay that proclaimed the discipline of folkloristics as moribund, if not actually deceased, was all the more insulting because, if you remember, it was entitled, That's All, Folks, which is a borrowing from popular culture, namely the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies Bugs Bunny tradition. These words, uttered by a stuttering Porky Pig, signified that the cartoon was over. and I put as an incidentally a little footnote here, the use of a stuttering pig and Elmer Fudd's list and other insults to individuals with various speech impediments and other disabilities would no longer be deemed politically correct. Some of the cartoons have that. But the use of the tagline as the title of the article essentially equates the field of folklore to an animated cartoon that is over. I'm not aware that any folklorist wrote a letter of protest or rebuttal, though I tried to do so. I'm sorry to say that my response, Folkloristics Redivivus, was not published by Lingua Franca, although it does appear on their website even to this day. The last paragraph of my response reads, at a moment in American history when multicultural diversity is being celebrated, this is precisely when enlightened university administrators ought to be encouraging practitioners of an international discipline which goes back to Herder and the Grimms, a discipline which has been ahead of its time in recognizing the importance of folklore, in promoting ethnic pride, and in providing invaluable data for the discovery of native cognitive categories and patterns of worldview and values. Lingua Franca did publish several short letters of protest, including one from Indiana University, entitled, Is Folklore Finished? And it was signed by Liz Locke and 80 other graduate students. Nothing, however, from the IU faculty. No letter from the IU faculty, and no letter of protest from AFS. Not a peep. It seems to me that both academic and public sector folklorists have a stake in defending our discipline when it's attacked. Where was the AFS leadership on this occasion? Is it a case of the proverb, silence gives consent? And I had to put a proverb in, or Wolfgang said he would boycott this meeting. Did or does AFS think that folklore as a discipline is dead? I might add parenthetically and maybe a little gleefully that Lingua Franca, which started in 1991, ended in 2001. So it turned out that it was Lingua Franca, not folklore, that died a premature death. And I can happily report that folklore successfully defied its gloomy prophecy and lives on. The first, and in my opinion, the principal reason for the decline of folklore programs at universities is the continued lack of innovation in what we might term grand theory. In Lingua Franca parlance, quote, folklore is considered under-theorized, and people have talked about this even at these meetings. Elliot Oring, one of our few folklore theorists, put it equally succinctly in an aside in his paper on the future of American folklore studies in response. Quoting Oring, folklore is liminal precisely because it has no theory or methodology that governs its perspective. End quote. Any academic discipline worth its salt must have basic theoretical and methodological concepts. Folkloristics has some, to be sure, but the majority were devised in the 19th century or early 20th century and have neither been superseded nor added to, or I can see. Interestingly enough, most grand theory in folklore was proposed by armchair or library folklorists, not field workers. I'm thinking of Fraser's formulations of principles of sympathetic magic or Max Muller's speculations about solar mythology. And even in the 20th century, what little grand theory exists comes from Freud and Levi-Strauss, neither of whom would qualify as field workers. Most field workers are involved with local communities and are not always concerned with the theoretical implications of the data they gather. Historically speaking, the roots of the discipline of folkloristics lie in antiquarianism, or what I might term as the quest for the quaint, or perhaps quest for the curious. In my travels to folklore centers overseas and in this country, I see more often than not what I would call butterfly collecting. Items of folklore are treated as rare exotica, to metaphorically speaking have a pin stuck through them, and mounted in a display archival case such that it's almost impossible to imagine that the folklore items were ever alive, that is, performed. Context is typically ignored, and is the text only still that is prized by the local collector. Because such local collectors who ought to have ideas of a theoretical or methodological nature do not, the field has by default been left to armchair library scholars, the modern analogs to Fraser. In the United States, the a-theoretical void is exacerbated by the paucity of even armchair or library scholars. Despite the richness of our library resources and the infinite capacity of information technology with its dazzling array of databases, American folklorists, and this is sad, have contributed precious little to folklore theory and method. Almost every viable theoretical and methodological concept employed in folkloristics has come from Europe. In one sense, I suppose it doesn't really matter where a good idea comes from. Folkloristics is and always has been and always will be an international discipline. So we gladly use French folklorists, actually Belgian, Arnold van Gennep's notes of rites of passage, or Finnish folklorist Karl Krohn's historic geographic method, or Swedish folklorist Karl von Siegel's concept of active bear and archetype. But all these concepts were formed at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. Where are the new hypotheses and speculations about folklore? Now, I can just imagine some of you folklorists, especially those of you with a healthy dose of nationalism and pride, saying, "Oh, wait a minute. Americans have made contributions to theoretical folkloristics. What about feminist theory? What about performance theory? What about oral formulaic theory?" Yeah, well, what about these so-called theories? Although Perry and Lord are given credit for developing oral formulaic theory, Foley has shown, I think, pretty well that the roots of the theory come from European scholars who preceded Perry and Lord. The situation is analogous to Child's canonical collection of English and Scottish ballads, which was incontestably modeled after the Danish folklore, Sven Grufvig's massive treatment of Danish ballads, or Sif Thompson's revision of Finnish folklorist Ganga Liana's Archetypes. Thompson used to say it was embarrassing he'd be introduced as Mr. Arne Thompson. People didn't realize it was two different people. American folklorists have for the most part been followers, not leaders. In all italics. I have to admit, I fall into this category too, having been inspired by Russian folklorist Vladimir Kraus' morphology of the folktale and Austrian Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory. As for feminist theory, what precisely is the theory of feminist theory? Despite the existence of books and articles with feminist theory in their titles, one looks in vain for a serious articulation of what that theory is. The idea that women's voices and women's roles in society have been adversely impacted by male chauvinism and bias is certainly true, but does that truism constitute a proper theory? And what of performance theory? No folklorist would deny that folklore lives only when it's performed, and that folklore performances involve participants and audiences, and that the issue of competence in performance is a feature to be recorded and analyzed. But where is the theory in performance theory? I do not consider either so-called feminist theory or performance theory to be grand theory. As far as I'm concerned, there are simply somewhat pretentious ways of saying that we should study folklore as performed and we should be more sensitive to the depiction of women in folkloristic texts and contexts. True grand theories allow us to understand data which would otherwise remain enigmatic if not indecipherable. And here we may observe that some of the older grand theories continue to yield insight. Consider the Jewish superstition that one should never have a button sewn on or a garment, or otherwise repaired while a person is wearing that garment. How many of you know that superstition? Yeah, it's a pretty standard superstition. You can't go out and have the button sewn on while you're wearing it. With the help of Fraser's law of homeopathic magic, we can quite easily explain the custom. The only time a garment is sewn on while it's worn is when a corpse is being dressed. Hence, sewing on a detached button or repairing a tear in a garment is treating the wearer of a garment as a corpse, and in effect signifying that the individual might die. No wonder it's considered such a taboo. In maritime folklore, we learn that it's bad luck to whistle while on board ship. And I remember back in my own days in the U.S. Navy, a long time ago, being chastised by a warrant officer for whistling. Why should whistling be forbidden on a ship? Once again, grand theory can help us. Whistling, given the principle of like produces like, the basis of Fraser's law of homeopathic magic, is a model of a windstorm. In fact, there's even a folk metaphor to whistle up a storm. Though wind was clearly a necessity in days of sail, too much wind was clearly not a desideratum, as it might result in the ship's capsizing and sinking. The point here simply is that grand theory, once formulated, may continue to yield insight. And as I think probably all of you know, I find that psychoanalytic theory qualifies as grand theory, allowing us to fathom otherwise inexplicable folkloristic data. For example, there's a Japanese superstition: pregnant women should never open an oven door. Informants could say only that it was bad luck. But with the knowledge gained from the symbolic equivalence of oven and womb, as attested in the phrase even in American folklore, with pregnant women described as having a bun in the oven, we can understand that this is again an application of Fraser's homeopathic magic. Opening an oven door would be an invitation for a miscarriage to occur. In this case, we have to use both Freud and Fraser to fully explain the superstition. The point is that most collections of superstitions, like the majority of folklore collections, be they proverbs or folktales, offer no explanation whatsoever. Let me give one further illustration of the application of psychoanalytic theory to a puzzling item of folklore. From medieval Spain to modern-day Latin America, one of the most popular Spanish ballads is known as Del Gadina. I have a student, Sarah Portnoy, who's writing a dissertation on this for the Spanish and Portuguese department, where I'm not sure psychoanalytic theory is that welcome. More than 500 versions of this romance corrido have been published. Famed Spanish ballad scholar Ramon Menendez Vidal claimed that this Spanish ballad is found wherever the Spanish language is spoken, and expressed his belief that, quote, Del Gadina is without a doubt the most widely known romance in Spain and America. The summary of the ballad says, Del Gadina is the story of a young woman who resists her father's incestuous advances, and for this she's locked up and denied anything to eat while she's fed only salty foods. This is in Harry Goldberg's wonderful index of these things. It's motif T411.1, in that father desires daughter sexually, she refuses. The abundant scholarship in the ballad tends to treat it as a literal reflection of the horrors of father-daughter incest, and in particular the absolute power of the father in the Hispanic family structure, typical kind of Boasian culture reflective literal approach. To date, no one has offered a convincing explanation of just why this ballad has enjoyed so many centuries of popularity. Delgadina is the youngest of 3 daughters of the king, and in some versions she wears provocative clothing, including a transparent dress. In many versions of the ballad, there's some dispute over who is to blame for the father's attempt to make Delgadina his mistress. Often it is Delgadina who is blamed by her sisters or her mother. In one verse, after Delgadina begs her mother in vain for a jug of water, the mother responds, "Get away, Delgadina, get away, you evil bitch. Because of you, I am 7 years a wronged wife." In another version, this time the Sephardic one, the mother replies, "Get thee hence, Jewish beast. Get thee down, cruel beast. On thy account these 7 years I have lived unhappily in marriage." Now it's important to note that this ballad is typically sung by women to other women. It's thus clearly very much a women's song. The daughter fantasizes that her father is not happy with her mother, but would prefer her instead. As Barbara Aiken puts it in a 1928 article, kind of obscure, the girl is jealous of her mother and thinks, "My father really prefers me to my mother and would like to put me in her place and over my elder sisters." In a parallel, probably cognate ballad of Silvana, it's arranged that the mother actually takes the daughter's place in bed for the prearranged meeting with the father king. What I believe we have here with this version is what Wendy Doniger of Chicago calls the bed trick, and I call it projective inversion. If we perceive this celebrated ballad as a thinly disguised electoral story, we can see that it represents wishful thinking on the part of the daughter. She loves her father and wants to replace her mother in the marital bed. This taboo wish is transformed via projection into the father's attempt to seduce his daughter, and the mother substituting for the daughter in the parental bed is a perfect inversion of the taboo wish. Instead of the daughter substituting for her mother, the mother substitutes for the daughter, thereby saving the daughter from a taboo incestuous sexual act. The specific reference to the daughters being fed salt cannot help but remind us of Arne Thompson Tale Type 923, Love Like Salt, which is the basis of the King Lear plot, which also involves a king father's attempt to have incestuous relations with his daughter. And this plot is in turn reminiscent of A.T. Tale Type 706, The Maiden Without Hands, which also occurs in ballad form, and which has been interpreted by me as a striking case of projective inversion. One could also mention the tale of Lot's wife, who is turned to salt, after which his daughters seduce their drunken father, quite explicit electoral tale. Now, whether or not one agrees with these interpretations, you can certainly see the interpretations would not have been possible without recourse to grand theory, in this case, Freud's Oedipal theory, in my modest edition of the concept of projective inversion. And as to the reasons for the long-lived popularity of a father-daughter incest projection in Hispanic cultures, it's worth remembering that the central plot of Catholicism involves a virgin being impregnated without her consent by a heavenly father. Another electoral fantasy with overtones of projective inversion. In summary form, I'd like to seduce my father, but that's forbidden, so in the projection it's my father who seduces me, much to my mother's consternation, with the psychological advantage of leaving me guilt-free. It's not my fault that my father desires me. The popularity of this plot in Catholic circles is also attested by a saint's legend, namely of Saint Dymphna. After her mother died, her father, a pagan Irish chieftain named Damon, searched the whole world for a woman to replace his wife, but was unsuccessful until he returned home and saw that his daughter Dymphna was as beautiful as her mother. He makes advances, but she flees. He catches up with her and bells her, but when she refuses to surrender, he kills her. The fact that the daughter dies or has her masturbatory hands cut off, as in 1806, is a sign that it is, in the final analysis, she who is ultimately punished for her original incestuous wish. Now, admittedly, I well know that this particular type of grand theory is not widely accepted, to say the least, by conventional mainstream folklorists, which includes most of you. But my point is that without this or other grand theories, folklore texts will forever remain as mere collectania with little or no substantive content analysis. The stereotype of folklorists as simply collectors, obsessive classifiers, and archivists is strengthened each time yet another collection of unanalyzed folklore is published. And this brings me to what I think is the second major reason for the decline of folkloristics as a respected and honored academic discipline. One reason, as I've noted, is the lack of new grand theory, but a second reason, I believe, is that we professional folklorists are badly outnumbered by amateurs who give our field a bad name. In the first week of June 2004, to my surprise, I was invited to participate in an ambitious conference in Atlanta called Mythic Journeys. Do you know about this? Designed to honor the centennial of the birth of Joseph Campbell, not one of my icons. The event was organized by the Mythic Imagination Institute and was supported by the Joseph Campbell Foundation and the Jung Society of Atlanta. And sponsored by a number of groups including Borders, Books and Music, Parabola Magazine, and the Krispy Kreme Foundation. Although there were dozens of panels and presentations that were concerned with folklore, though not necessarily myth, there were very few professional folklorists in attendance.
The presenters included storytellers, artists, filmmakers, Jungian analytical psychologists, and a few individuals who were self-identified as folklorists. Before leaving for Atlanta, out of curiosity, I looked up a number of these fellow panelists and presenters via Google, and was startled to discover that many of them were faculty members at small colleges and who were listed as professors of folklore, who obviously taught courses in what they termed folklore. The courses were typically concerned with searching for Jungian archetypes in literature, including Tolkien, not ours, or exploring manifestations of Campbell's composite monomyth, which has little, if anything, to do with myth proper, but is rather based on a combination of legend and folktale. Now, there's no way other than establishing a fascist police state for the American Folklore Society to prevent such folklorists from teaching what they call folklore. Bob Georges wrote an essay indicating his disgust at discovering there were many individuals who simply declared themselves to be folklorists without any formal training or any study of the subject. He also expressed disappointment that many who were trained as folklorists, like us, concealed that fact, preferring instead to claim that they belong to some other academic disciplines. Here I cannot forbear reminding you of one of the worst reported instances of a folklorist refusing to acknowledge his disciplinary affiliation. It happened in 1992 at UCLA. Exile president of Haiti, Jean-Bertrand Aristide, who had some kind of interest in folklore, was to speak on the campus. So Donald Cosentino was at that time the chair of the then still existing folklore and mythology department. And as is customary, a high-ranking official, this was the vice chancellor, was on stage to welcome the audience before turning the gavel over to Cosentino to introduce the speaker. Right before the event began, the UCLA vice chancellor whispered to Cosentino, "We have a head of state here. Under no circumstances will I introduce you as the chair of folklore and mythology. I will introduce you as from the English department. Let's not embarrass ourselves." Cosentino did as instructed and introduced Aristide without revealing that he, Cosentino, was the chair of the folklore and mythology department. What bothers me most about this incident is not so much the Vice Chancellor's outrageous insult to our field, but the fact that Cosentino didn't fight it, but rather he cowardly acquiesced. I can tell you, if I had been in such a position, short of punching out the Vice Chancellor publicly on stage, I would have actually reported his whispered conversation and announced proudly my position as chair of folklore and mythology. In other words, I would have sought to embarrass the Vice Chancellor rather than have him embarrass me and my field. A truly disgraceful incident in our academic history, one that was the very first item mentioned in the Lingua Franca article. Related to the fact that we seem to be besieged by popularizers, non-folklorists masquerading as folklore scholars, I should note, and I saw this even here in Salt Lake City at the Sam Weller bookstore, if you walk into any large commercial bookstore, Barnes & Noble, Borders, or whatever, and you look at the folklore mythology section, what do you find? You find the numerous anthologies of Greek myths and dictionaries of mythology, entries mostly to Greek and Roman mythology, volumes of folk tales from all over the world retold by editors. The word retold should be anathema in professional folklorists. I was stunned that Roger Abrams allowed the Pantheon book of African American tales to be retold by him. Anyway, they're vulgarized and dumbed down for children, and a half dozen books by Joseph Campbell. I recall one incident several years ago in the Barnes & Noble's bookstore in Berkeley. And although I prefer secondhand used bookstores, every once in a while I go to a commercial bookstore just to see if there's a new book that I should know about. So on this occasion in Barnes & Noble, I couldn't find the usual folklore mythology section. It had never been moved. They're always, shuffling the shelves and stuff. So I finally went to one of the bookstore personnel and said, where is the folklore mythology section? Usually they're labeled, religion, sociology, so on and so forth. In this case, the folklore mythology label was absent. And in its place, simply emblazoned in large, bold letters, was Joseph Campbell. I was fainted on the spot. I was actually relieved that at least none of my books were found in the section. My sole point in mentioning this disheartening incident is to suggest that for many members of the literate public, the study of folklore means precisely Joseph Campbell and his writings. And I get this in graduate applications. I want to be graduate in folklore so I can read more Joseph Campbell. I don't get one of those people don't usually get in, but still, I have to read the letters. And I don't even know if folklorists have said much about this huge corpus of Campbelliana. I don't know if his books are actually even reviewed in JEF. Is this a case of silence gives assent? Very likely, more people have been introduced to the subject matter of folklore by the writings of Joseph Campbell or the PBS television nauseating series of lectures by him than by any other source. And we folklorists have said little or nothing about him and his theories. My thesis is simply this: the combination of a lack of new grand theory and the failure to counter the effective efforts of numerous amateurs and dilettantes who have successfully claimed possession of the field of folklore as their fiefdom has understandably led to a public perception of folkloristics as a weak academic discipline. a perception unfortunately too often shared by college and university administrators. The American Folklore Society, since its inception, has had as its goal the professionalization of the discipline of folkloristics. And we had some good statements by the various candidates in the last hour or so. JAF should be the primary forum for the expression of new theoretical and methodological advances, and the book review section of the journal should critique and rebut amateurish attempts to analyzing folkloristic data. Now, I'm not blaming the past or present editors of JAF for the failure to do so. They can only publish the articles submitted them by us folklorists, constituting the membership of AFS. So we must accept the blame for the state of our discipline. So it's up to us to fulfill the promise of our beloved field to demonstrate to all interested parties that folkloristics is a world-class global discipline with its own valid theories and methods, and we should not leave our field by default to popular amateurs. Fake lore and folklorismus abound everywhere, and we run the risk of being overwhelmed by the sheer quantity of unscholarly anthologies of adulterated folklore mixed with creative writing. As for the Mythic Journeys conference in June in Atlanta, there was really a terrific, splendid associated website, which I recommend in one way to you, with its stunning, brilliant graphics. On the screen, it was a map of the world, and you could click on different areas or people's world. You see this? And if you click on it, the myth is told. They have a voice accompaniment, and so you get a myth. It's great. But at the bottom of the screen, there were various alternative options. One of the options was write your own myth. And I saw at one point, by following through, that 10 or 11-year-old children, a number of them, had accepted the challenge and emailed their own myths to the website. Nothing irritates me more than when after I give a lecture on folklore to a group of elementary or secondary school teachers, I find one little enthusiastic teacher running up to say after she very much appreciates the importance of it, and that's why she encourages all the members of her second grade class to write them as an exercise. No wonder such children eventually grow up to be confused about what myths really are, and to become fans of Joseph Campbell's conviction that all of us can be heroes of our own myths, looking for bliss. Since apparently no folklorist has hitherto made any critique of Campbell, I'd like to take this opportunity to do so briefly. It's about time. Part of the problem stems from the fact that Campbell doesn't really know what a myth is, and he doesn't really distinguish it from folktale and legend, two genres which provide most of the illustrative examples in his popular Hero with 1,000 Faces that I know you've all seen. First published in 1949. His examples of myths include Little Red Riding Hood and the porcupine subtype of Star Husband, neither of which any folklorist would dream of classifying as myth. Campbell tries to delineate a worldwide hero pattern, but he makes no mention of von Hahn's initial pioneering statement of 1876, in which von Hahn sought to isolate features of what he termed the Aryan expulsion return hero pattern. Nor does Campbell refer to Otto Rahm's path-breaking myth of the birthday hero, published in 1909, or Lord Raglan's famous pattern of the hero biography, which appeared as an article in Folklore in 1934, and then shortly thereafter in book form in 1936. Now let me say something more about the Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is still, I think, Campbell's best-known book, and it was his first. Where did he get that resonant, catchy title? In 1940, Campbell met Swami Nityananda, who was a devoted disciple of Ramakrishna. Stay with me on this. In The Hero with 1,000 Faces, Campbell cites Swami Nityananda's translation of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We know that Campbell was very intrigued by the writings of Sri Ramakrishna because he refers to him often. In the second volume of The Cultural Heritage of India, the Sri Ramakrishna Centenary Memorial, Swami Nityananda contributed a long 176-page essay entitled Sri Ramakrishna and the Spiritual Renaissance. We know that Campbell read this 1936 essay because he cited it in his 1960 essay, Primitive Man as Metaphysician. Listen to the following quote from Ramakrishna contained in Swami Nityananda's essay. Quote, "But he who is called Krishna is also called Shiva and bears the name Shakti, Jesus, and Allah as well. The one Rama with 1,000 names." The one Rama with 1,000 names. The substance is one under different names. We know that Campbell was a truly voracious reader and was a master of assimilating much of what he read. We shall never know for certain, but the passage bears an eerie resemblance to Campbell's title. All we have to do is substitute hero for Rama and faces for names, and we get the one here with 1,000 faces. Now, I'm arguing inspiration here, not plagiarism. In any case, the Campbell classic has been called by scholars a sweeping, engrossing study of the hero myth, but the narratives analyzed by Campbell aren't myths at all. They're folktales and legends. In a discussion of the Magic Flight, which is surely a folktale motif, Campbell includes the narrative of Jason's quest for the Golden Fleece. But this has nothing to do with myth proper, it's a hero legend. There's nothing in the narrative referring to the creation of the world or mankind. And given Campbell's abiding interest in the quest theme, it's not surprising he frequently cites Arthurian material a subject he studied for his Columbia MA thesis. He was at Columbia, actually took a course in Boaz, so it didn't show. including mention of the search for the Holy Grail. But Arthurian stories of that kind are definitely legends, not myths. In Creative Mythology, the fourth volume of his tetralogy, The Masks of God, he retells Gottfried von Strassburg's Tristan and Wolfram von Eschenbach's Parzival. Now, these are significant major literary medieval masterpieces, but by no stretch of the folkloristic imagination could either one be considered a myth. Campbell suggests that Wolfram utilized, quote, an altogether secular mythology, but myth is sacred. And so at best, these texts could be construed as literary legends, yet both involve quests, specifically associated with the Holy Grail. Campbell also considers Thomas Mann and Joyce as myth makers. One can only conclude that the volume Creative Mythology doesn't deal with myth in the strict technical sense at all. Rather, it is a volume of essentially wide-ranging literary criticism. Since Campbell isn't clear about what a myth is, no wonder that his myriad of followers are equally confused. This loose definition of myth, one unfortunately shared by many writers on the subject, would seem to confirm Gregory Hansen's criticism in Folklore Forum that definitions of folklore, which would include myth, have been stretched so far as to include everything. Some writers, including scholars of books on myths, include B-movies and novels under the rubric of myth. As Hansen puts it, the problem is that if everything is now folklore, then nothing is folklore. Now, Campbell's adaptation of Folklorist Vangelis writes a passage was, I think, insightful. But the universalist assumption, based on an unproven assumption of psychic unity, namely that all peoples possess the same mythic structure, is not. In Creative Mythology, the fourth volume of the tetralogy, The Masks of God, Campbell himself refers to his own book, The Hero, as follows. Quote, in The Hero with a Thousand Faces, I have shown that myths and wonder tales belong to a general type which I have called the adventure of the hero, that has not changed in essential form through the documented history of mankind. End of quote. It's long been a popular fantasy among amateur students of myth that all people share the same stories. This is clearly an example of wishful thinking. Campbell referred to the hero pattern as a universal monomyth, borrowing this vacuous portmanteau neologism from James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. On the universality issue, the empirical facts suggest otherwise. There's not one single myth that is universal. Not one. And this statement runs counter to Campbell's view. He was actually invited to contribute to a special issue of Daedalus. This is the point. These people get invited, you see, to be spokesmen for our field. He was asked to contribute to a special Daedalus, an issue devoted to myth and myth-making in 1959, an issue that also contained contributions by Eliade, Cluckon, and Dorson. Campbell began his essay, The Historical Development of Mythology, which was based on his introduction to the then forthcoming Masks of God, with the following statement, quote, the comparative study of the mythologies of the world compels us to view the cultural history of mankind as a unit, where we find that such themes as the fire theft, deluge, land of the dead, virgin birth, and the resurrected hero have a worldwide distribution, appearing everywhere in new combinations while remaining on the elements of the kaleidoscope only a few, and always the same. Even a beginning student of folklore could dispute this kind of argument by assertion. It's really easy to make ex cathedra pronouncement about universals, but really difficult to document them. Take the virgin birth, for example. If we look in the motif index, we find motif T547, which you know by heart, no doubt, birth from virgin, with just 3 citations listed for the motif. One refers to European saints, another to a classical Greek myth, and one to a South American Indian source. Period. I'm not aware of any virgin birth stories in Africa. None are cited in the motif index for Siberia, Polynesia, Melanesia. We have dozens of myths reported from Aboriginal Australia and New Guinea, but no virgin birth stories there. So can we accept Campbell's assertion on faith that the virgin birth has a worldwide distribution? In The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Campbell has a whole section devoted to the virgin birth. But the one African text cited tells of the first man having intercourse with his wives and daughters to produce children and animals. Hardly a convincing example of a virgin birth. In his list of universals, Campbell mentions the deluge. 2. In my edited book, The Flood Myth, you can easily see that this myth is essentially absent from sub-Saharan Africa. They have myths, just not the flood myth. Campbell plays fast and loose with folklore data to illustrate his so-called hero pattern. For example, in a section called In the Belly of the Whale, Campbell cites, of course, the story of Jonah. And I'm sure that Western, unsophisticated, ethnocentric readers nod their head in approval, since this narrative of the Old Testament would seem to be a perfect example of this theme, though technically the creature is not really identified as a whale. In any case, Campbell then goes on, he realizes he needed another example of In the Belly of the Whale. He says, the little German girl Red Riding Hood was swallowed by a wolf. That's his second example. Now, the narrative of Red Riding Hood, of course, is not a myth. It's a folk tale. It's Arnold Thompson 3330, and it's about a girl, which makes it about a heroine, not a hero. Does Campbell's pattern apply equally to the female of the species or only to males? Doesn't deal with that issue. An alleged swallower is not a whale but a wolf. But more importantly, we know that in the oral versions of this girl-centered folktale, as opposed to the literary writings by males, such as Thorold and the Grimms, the girl is not swallowed by the wolf at all. Instead, she escapes through a clever ruse by pretending to need to go outside and defecate. So since the heroine we're writing is a heroine, not a hero, since she's not swallowed by the wolf, or tigress in the Korean, Japanese, and Chinese versions, it would seem to me that this tale is really not the perfect example of the existence of proposed mythic pattern in the belly of the whale. Yet people swear, you see them at pledge night and so on, and even at these meetings, that Joseph Campbell has changed their life. They found bliss, whatever, and they're getting Krispy Kreme donuts. Despite the lack of evidence, Campbell appears to have no doubt about the existence of folklore universals, and in this respect, he's a throwback to 19th century theories of psychic unity. Most folklorists would agree the occurrence of parallels are due to monogenesis and diffusion rather than polygenesis, but this is not Campbell's position. His method, if we can even bear to call it that, is largely based on Adolf Pasteur's unsubstantiated notion of elementar Gedanken, or elementary ideas, a clear-cut intellectual precursor of Jung's concept of archetype. I'm getting everybody into this. Both of which concepts are uncritically accepted by Campbell. In his essay, Bios and Mythos, Prologue to a Science of Mythology, written, interestingly enough, for Geza Roheim's 1951 Festschrift, Campbell makes this unequivocal statement, quote, "Moreover, it is of first importance not to lose sight of the fact that the mythological archetypes, Bastian's elementary ideas, cut across the boundaries of culture spheres and are not confined to any one or two, but are variously represented in all." Campbell eventually, by his own admission, came to prefer Jung to Freud, although he did use both in The Hero, and he seems to have accepted the idea of Jung's collective unconscious. Mythology, according to Campbell, quote, "is the expression of the collective unconscious." However, in marked contrast to Jung, he does occasionally accept the fact that diffusion may account once in a while for the occurrence of cross-cultural correspondences. Some of the Columbia training may be rubbed off. Still, it is Campbell's insistence on the existence of archetypes that I find disturbing. Listen to this passage from Myths to Live By, quote from Campbell. "All my life as a student of mythologies, I've been working with these archetypes, and I can tell you they do exist, do's and italics, and are the same all over the world. As I'm sure most of you know, Jung claimed that there were pan-human, pre-cultural, autochthonous images that were supposedly part of a collective as opposed to a personal unconscious substratum common to all humans, and that the manifestation of the instincts were to be found in dreams and folk narratives. There were only a limited number of these archetypes, thank goodness. The great mother, the wise old man, the child, foreignness, and so on. And just as professional folklorists have tended to ignore Campbell and failed to criticize his oeuvre, they similarly refrained from criticizing Jung and his notion of archetypes. Where are the folklorists? Why don't you step up to the plate and talk about these things? Yet in sections of bookstores with books on folklore, we find almost as many Jungian studies of folkloristic subjects as there are books by Joseph Campbell. Why has there been no critique by folklorists of the concept of archetype? Can't believe that all of you believe this stuff. And you can't all be mystics. I believe there's no single idea promulgated by amateurs which has done more harm to serious folklore study than the notion of archetype. Now, I'm not talking about the finished method here. I find it invariably cited by ignorant students as well as equally uninformed members of the general public. In the Q&A period, whenever I have occasion to give a public lecture on folklore, they always raise this. The problem with archetype, aside from the unwarranted assumption of psychic unity and universalism, is the practical one of simple identification of such, as is all too clear in the classic essay by Jung on the child archetype. Now here's what Jung has to say about one of these archetypes. Quote, "Often the child is formed after the Christian model." I'll have more to say about that in a minute. "Sometimes the child appears in a cup of a flower out of a golden egg or as the center of a mandala. In dreams it often appears as a dreamer's son or daughter, as a boy, youth, or young girl, occasionally of an exotic origin, Indian or Chinese with a dusky skin, or appearing more cosmic, surrounded by stars or with a starry coronet, or as the king's son or the witch's child with demonic attributes. Seen as a special instance of the treasure hard to attain motif, the child motif is extremely variable," says Jung, "and assumes all manner of shapes, such as the jewel, the pearl, the flower, the chalice, the golden egg, the quaternity, the golden ball, and so on. It can be interchanged with these and similar images almost without limit. The critical methodological question, seems to me, is how do we know when we come upon a golden egg in a folktale that it's really the child archetype? But here we must recall Jung's own methodological dictum, if you can call it that. Archetypes are by definition unknowable. What a great tool. One can approach them only asymptotically or tangentially. And Jung reiterates it. If you read through all the different books on Jung, and I forced myself to do it, and he says again and again, they are unknowable. So if archetypes are unknowable, how do we know them? And one additional theoretical difficulty is that these supposed archetypes are allegedly pan-human and pre-cultural. Now, since they're pre-cultural, they're only marginally affected by cultural conditioning. And you can easily see why cultural anthropologists, if you're leaving out culture, they're not interested. Culture is their working definitional operational concept. They're not interested in a theory that postulates pre-cultural entities, whether they come from sociobiology or from Jungian dogma. Incidentally, I blame Freud, actually, in part for Jung's postulation of the existence of archetypes in the collective unconscious. One of Freud's most grievous errors, I'm critical of Freud here, was his belief that Haeckel's biological discovery that ontology recapitulates phylogeny applied equally to mental products. In an attempt to explain the multiple existence of certain recurring fantasies, seduction by an adult, observation of parental intercourse, the threat of castration, Freud offered the following speculation. So here's what Freud had to say. He's just as wrong as Jung. Whence comes the need for these fantasies and the material for them? There can be no doubt that their sources lie in the instincts. But it still has to explain, says Freud, why these same fantasies with the same content are created on every occasion. I am prepared with an answer which I know will seem daring to you. It's just daring, it's also wrong. I believe that these primal fantasies, as I should like to call them, and no doubt a few others are a phylogenetic endowment. In them, the individual reaches beyond his own experience into primeval experience at points where his own experience has been too rudimentary. It seems to me quite possible that all the things that are told to us today in analysis as fantasy, the seduction of children, the inflaming of sexual excitement by observing parental intercourse, the threat of castration or castration itself, were once real occurrences in the primeval times of the human family, and the children in their fantasy are simply filling in the gaps in the individual truth of prehistoric truth. And I just got through reading a manuscript translation from another language for one of the university presses that was exhibiting here, of somebody who believes all this, that people fill in. He's analyzing the Grimm tales on the basis of supposed primeval human history where where incest was allowed, homosexuality was allowed, and that bestiality was allowed. That's why you have these tales of animals in them. So there are some people who believe this stuff. This is an unequivocal, if dubious, statement. That is to say, Freud saying if an individual lacks a similar fantasy in his or her own life, that symbol or fantasy will be provided through the ontogenetic recapitulation of phylogeny. Probably the most famous or infamous example of Freud's applications principle is the conclusion of totem and taboo. After acknowledging that the mere thought of killing his father on the part of his son could cause guilt, I mean, if you ever thought about it, when a parent dies, you think somehow it's your fault. In the end, Freud decides no, it was an actual historical act of patricide arising from the primal horde's band of brothers united to kill their father that accounted for the Oedipus complex and totemism and taboo. This, according to Freud, is because supposedly primitive man, unlike modern man, is not inhibited. This is the basic thesis of this whole book that I just read. And according to the thought is directly converted into the deed. The last lines of totem and taboo are direct results of Freud's, I think, unfortunate phylogenetic bias. Quote, for that reason, I think we may well assume the case we are discussing, though without vouching for the absolute certainty of the decision, that in the beginning was the deed. So this notion that Freud had a phylogenetic inheritance is clearly comparable to Jung's collective unconscious. It's the same wrong track. Now, Freud's whole theoretical basis for psychoanalysis was essentially the same as 19th century folklore theory, specifically the doctrine of survival stemming from linear evolutionary theory. Adult neurotic symptoms were in essence survivals from a traumatic situation that had occurred in infancy or early childhood. To understand or explain the apparently irrational symptoms, the analyst had to reconstruct the fuller picture from early childhood by means of free association and dream content. This is exactly the same as what Andrew Lang described as the method of folklore, which I have included actually in the Rutledge series that Mike mentioned. Lang, when he compared archaeology and folklore, says, quote, here is a form of study, folklore, which collects and compares the similar but immaterial relics of old races, the surviving superstitions and stories, the ideas which are in our time but not of it. And quote, the theory was based on the 19th century child-savage equation. As savages passed through barbarism and route to civilization, so children pass through adolescence and route to adulthood. To understand adult folklore, survivals and civilization, one needs to find the fuller form supposedly existing in present-day savage or primitive societies. In Lang's words, the method is, when an apparently irrational or anomalous custom is found in any country, to look for a country where a similar practice is found and where the practice is no longer irrational and anomalous, but in harmony with the manners and ideas of the people among whom it prevails. Our method, he says then, is to compare the seemingly meaningless customs and manners of civilized races with the similar customs and manners which exist among the uncivilized and still retain their meaning. Very interesting use of the other here. Finally, Lang concludes, folklore represents in the midst of a civilized race the savage ideas out of which civilization has been evolved. Freud too saw a parallel between ontogeny and phylogeny. In his foreword to the German edition of Captain John G. Burke's Catalogic Rights of All Nations, which he wrote at the request of Viennese folklorist Friedrich Krauss, Freud wrote the following, Quote, the science of folklore has traveled another path, but nevertheless it has arrived at the same results as psychoanalytic investigations. It shows us how imperfectly various peoples have succeeded in repressing their scatologic tendencies, and how the treatment of the experimental functions on various levels of civilization approaches the infantile stage of human life. It demonstrates to us the perdurance of the primitive, truly ineradicable, coprophilic interest in usages connected with popular custom, magical practice, cult acts, and the therapeutic act. This may also, I think, illustrate Freud's fascination with archaeology. It's the same principle, this historical reconstruction of the past. The governing intellectual paradigm in the 19th century was reconstruction of the past. So a shard, like a superstition or a neurotic symptom, was a survival, but a survival that could aid in the reconstruction of that past. All this is not to excuse Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, but only to show or suggest that Freud's thought may have been directly or indirectly one of the sources of this mystical idea. But there's yet another theoretical difficulty with Jungian archetype, and this concerns the unconcealed Christian content of some archetypes. I've already referred to Jung's specific mention of the Christian connection to the child archetype. But much more disturbing, however, is Jung's claim that Jesus Christ is an archetype. In his essay, Ion, Jung asks, is the self a symbol of Christ, or is Christ a symbol of the self? His answer, in the present study, I've affirmed the latter alternative. I've tried to show, says Jung, how the traditional Christ image concentrates upon itself the characteristics of an archetype, the archetype of the self. Now, I'm not putting words in Jung's mouth. He adds in an italicized sentence, quote, Christ exemplifies the archetype of the self. And in the footnote, he invites the reader, compare my observations on Christ as archetype in the psychological approach or the dogma of the Trinity. Now, if you keep in mind that archetypes are supposed to be pan-human, this would constitute a most egregious example of extreme ethnocentrism, not to mention arrogance and hubris and Orientalism and all these other words, namely to assume that all peoples have a built-in archetypal Christian part of their consciousness regardless of their cultural and racial heritage. Jung states the primitive mentality does not invent myths, it experiences them. Presuming that would also apply to Christian archetypes. And actually it was Jung's Christian bias which made him so attractive to Freud as a possible successor in order to make psychoanalysis more acceptable to a non-Jewish public. But the extension of that bias into myth as a form of folklore is simply not intellectually defensible or tenable. The Jungian underpinnings of Campbell's approach to folklore have put the approach, I think, outside the limits of academic folkloristics. That may be one reason why nobody reviewed it. But the universalistic premise of psychic unity, coupled with the claim that archetypes are inherited, leaves little room for the influence of cultural relativism and the formation of archetypes. Now, the inheritance issue is a controversial one. Here's what Jung himself says about it. This is unbelievable. In the preface to Psyche and Symbol, published in 1958, not long before he died in 1961, Jung said the following. Listen to this. Mind is not born as tabula rasa. He says this again and again in his publications. Mind is not born as a tabula rasa. Like the body, it has its pre-established individual definiteness, namely forms of behavior. They become manifest in the ever-recurring patterns of psychic function. These people always refer them to the instinctual of animals. Just as the weaver bird, says Jung, will build its nest infallibly in its accustomed form, so then these archetypes appear. Birds, after all, aren't taught how to make nests or beavers to build dams. This is a very common false analogy. These archetypes, says Jung, are by no means useless archaic survivals or relics. They are living entities. This is a superorganic theory, which cause the pre-formation of numinous ideas or dominant representations. Now listen to this piece of doggerel. Quote, it is important to bear in mind that my concept of the archetypes has been frequently misunderstood as a kind of philosophical speculation. He clears it up this way. In reality, they belong to the realm of the activities of the instincts, and in that sense, they represent inherited forms of psychic behavior. Did you get all that? He says it's important that my concept of archetypes has been frequently misunderstood as a kind of philosophical speculation, that they've been inherited. Then he says that they're inherited. What are we to make of these coffee table books full of images of alleged archetypes? Of course, it's possible to produce images of mothers from different cultures, but this does not constitute hard evidence of the existence of a great mother archetype. Only that all cultures have mothers and images of them. Hardly the same, and they're hardly the same image. Even Christian images of Jesus and the Virgin Mary differ radically within Western cultures, typically taking on the physical racial features of the painters of the images, or their patrons. And if infantile conditioning is critical with respect to man-God relations, as Freud argued in The Future of an Illusion, then to the extent that infantile conditioning varies from culture to culture, so man-God relations will vary accordingly. And so there are different myths in different cultures. The constants are not archetypes, but human relationships. There are parent-child relationships in all cultures, and hence there are parent-child struggles in folklore around the world. Now, when Joseph Campbell wrote his 1944 commentary on the Grimm Tales for Pantheon, he actually did his homework. He talked about tail types, he talked about the motif index. I was actually quite impressed. All the scholarly apparatus that folklorists had at that time. He even mentioned the historic geographic method, the Finnish method, and so on, as the comparative method. Well, he said in the footnote that Boaz was a great practitioner of the method. This is not true by any stretch. And he did study with Boaz, but he should have known from that Boaz never once used the Finnish method. But Campbell's little bit of knowledge points to one of our problems. Folklorists have had some success in publicizing the results of our efforts for the past 2 centuries, such that members of other disciplines, after a minimum of reading, feel they are qualified to speak authoritatively about folkloristic matters. It seems the world is full of self-proclaimed experts in folklore. And a few like Joseph Campbell have been accepted as such by the general public and by PBS. I can't tell you how many students have, as I mentioned, have applied to the folklore program, mentioning the name and how much they love Joseph Campbell. I suppose we owe him something for getting people interested in our discipline. The problem is that so many people have read only Joseph Campbell and nothing else. Now, there are 2 other factors which contribute to the low level of folkloristics in the academy. And they are, one I call the loss of previous knowledge, lost knowledge. This is partly a euphemism for sloppy scholarship. And second, intimidation by informants. The loss of previous known facts is partly attributable to the veritable explosion of knowledge in all fields. It is amazing now, if you go to see what's published in any given year, look at the International Folklore Bibliography, and it's become increasingly difficult to keep up with all that's written in folkloristics and all the myriad journals and monograph series in all these different fields, which often include folklore data. Bibliographies and computer databases and search engines help to some extent, but there's still too many cases of reinventing the wheel. The issue of information retrieval is exacerbated by the growing number of amateurs purporting to represent our field, because they're still listed in all these databases. You don't know to get the article or book, it's a complete waste of time. I've already talked about Campbell's failure to reference Otto Rocker, Lord Raglan, who studied the hero pattern and better earlier, but there are many other examples. Here's one. In the mid-1940s, classicist Reese Carpenter gave the prestigious Sailor Lectures at UC Berkeley, and they were published in 1946 by the University of California Press as Folktale Fiction and Saga in the Homeric Epics. Now, in a book with that title, Folktale Fiction and Saga, you'd think there might have been at least a mention of tale type 1137, which is the ogre blinded, Polyphemus. Or also the motif in which Odysseus puts an oar on his shoulder and walks inland in search of a community that didn't know what he was carrying on his shoulder. But no such references can be found. Instead, we find a poorly argued proposition that the Odyssey contains the framework of the folktale of the bear's son, a hypothesis that Carpenter proposed after reading the scholarship by Panzer and others, which maintained that Beowulf was derived from that tale type. Now, we've had the tale type index since 1910, and the motif index since 1932. Not only could the classicists in 1946 get away with not citing such obvious folktale elements in the Odyssey, but even worse, a major press could publish a book obviously without having obtained competent pre-publication reviews by folktale specialists. You only have to compare the Reese Carpenter book with Bill Hanson's recently published Magnificent. If you don't know it, it's a fantastic book, Ariadne's Thread, a guide to international tales found in classical literature, to see the difference between research by a classicist posing as someone with a knowledge of folklore and a classicist who is an authentic, full-fledged folklorist, trained at Berkeley, of course. Here's another one. In 1955, Ray William France completed a doctoral dissertation at the University of Illinois entitled The Place of Folklore in the Creative Art of Mark Twain, which is just one of a whole raft of studies of Mark Twain's interest and use of folklore in his writings. France actually published an article, The Role of Folklore in Huckleberry Finn, 1956. And there was a similar monograph by Victor Royce West, who wrote Folklore in the Works of Mark Twain, 1930, drawing from his MA thesis at the University of Nebraska. These and other various attempts demonstrate, which is true, Twain's definite interest in folklore, but they're trying to show that he was interested in folklore. That was sort of a thesis. Their thesis could have been greatly enhanced by the simple matter of examining the membership of the American Folklore Society, US, during its early years. On page 94 of the very first issue of JAF, we find a list of the members of the American Folklore Society. Included among the names on the list is one S.L. Clemens of Hartford, Connecticut. How many knew that? Not only was Mark Twain a charter member of the American Folklore Society, but he remained a member for at least 5 years, according to membership lists in volumes 1 through 5. So this means he got JAF for the first 5 years, and we can assume he might actually have read some of the issues. In any case, given the fact that France and none of the many other people who've written whole dissertations on Mark Twain's possible interest in folklore have ever mentioned his membership in AFS. And this is what I mean by a a loss of knowledge. In other words, the knowledge exists, but the people don't know about it. Just the same thing as not knowing about Tale 1137 Polyphemus to somebody giving lectures on folktale and the Odyssey. I mean, it's a disgrace. And this is all lost knowledge. The same way that Montanel's assertion that folkloristics is a modern term. You see it at every turn. But if lost knowledge is an impediment to making advances in folkloristics, so also. And he wouldn't dream of saying anything in print that they might find insulting or offensive. And we had a debate on this in public once, and I asked him point blank about this, and he was very clear. He expresses his satisfaction in the sentence in perhaps his magnum opus. One problem down, I had written and lost no friends. And this is a book that I actually require my graduate students to know. It's a great book, the greatest book on fieldwork I think I've ever written. But this is it, I've written it and lost no friends. Now, I understand that the rapport achieving successful fieldwork often results in firm, if not lifelong, warm friendships. But giving informants drafts of articles and monographs to vet with the right of veto power, or at the very least the right to exercise censorship, I find unacceptable. Folkloristics, like any branch of learning, should not devolve into a popularity contest. What if doctors felt it was morally reprehensible to ever tell a patient that he or she had a serious disease that required immediate remedial action? This would surely not be in the patient's own best interest. While I don't think there's any need of deliberately offending an informant, there is a need to make the best possible and most enlightening analysis of any data elicited from that informant. If folklorists are afraid of saying anything that their informants might not like, the field will never become more than mountains of unanalyzed texts accumulating in folklore archives. Sometimes the issues involve more serious ethical questions, as is the case with our second major folklorist. Who was, again, one of the top people in the field, a very courageous person. In this instance, our folklorist collected Navajo folklore for several decades. You know who it is now. And his expertise was so extensive that he was invited to be the sole non-Navajo speaker in a lecture series for a purely Navajo audience. This was surely a great compliment to this folklorist. After lecturing on coyote stories to this audience, he was startled by a question posed by an elderly singer. Are you ready to lose a member of your family, was the question. Turned out there was a level of meaning in the coyote stories that the folklorist had not previously been aware of. It was a level that had to do with witchcraft. And the question was trying to warn the folklorist that he was on the edge of potentially dangerous territory with his research. The folklorist took the warning to heart. In an essay written on this incident, he remarked, quote, just as a folklorist needs to know where to begin, so one needs to recognize where to stop, and I've decided to stop here. And he continued, rather, as far as the discussion of coyote tales is concerned, I intend to avoid the information myself as unscientific and as unscholarly as that may seem. Indeed, in that regard, this is an unscholarly non-essay on an unreported of what I'm not going to be doing with text recorded over the past 25 years. The story is even worse. It's one thing to voluntarily desist from studying one's field data. It's quite another to destroy that data. In this case, it was a serious ethical problem because the principal informant of the folklorist died. And this folklorist knew that the Navajo feel obliged to avoid any interaction with the dead, and that included listening to the recorded voice of someone deceased on tape. In consultation with his deceased informant's widow, the folklorist boxed up 60-plus hours of original field recording tapes, as well as copies he'd used in classes and lectures, and sent them to the widow by registered mail, knowing full well that she would be obliged to destroy them. In his essay on the subject in JF, he describes how he came to make this painful decision. My view is that not only has he described the academic world of data that may not be able to be replicated, but that the Navajo themselves have lost a precious resource. We know that many Native Americans have been grateful for earlier work by folklorist anthropologists in preserving part of their culture, which has unfortunately faded away with the decimation of their populations and their acculturation in the mainstream American culture. This is no doubt an extreme example of informant intimidation, but I fear for our field of folkloristics if our very best scholars are timid about analyzing their data, or worse yet, impelled to destroy that data. The field cannot possibly advance if data is destroyed, or if we're afraid to analyze it fully for fear of offending someone, either an informant or a colleague. Now, I myself have had several personal brushes with would-be intimidation. The first occurred in the late 1960s. I had completed a co-authored study of Turkish verbal dueling. Realizing that some of the data included material that would be considered obscene by most middle-class Americans, I was uncertain where to submit it. I decided to submit it to SFQ, and I wrote a covering letter to the then editor Butler Waugh that Mike Jones mentioned, a folklorist with a doctorate in folklore from IU, explaining that I could understand if he couldn't accept the paper for publication. I was surprised and delighted to hear from him that he liked the paper and accepted it for publication in SFQ. 6 or so months after the paper had been accepted, I received an unexpected and unwelcome letter from Edwin Capers Kirkland, Butler Waugh had moved from the University of Florida to Florida International University, Miami. Not a good career move, I don't think. And Kirkland was a temporary acting editor of SFQ. The letter informed me he was very sorry, but it turned out that SFQ was not able or willing to publish my Turkish verbal paper after all. The reason given was not about the cogency of my argument or the accuracy of the reportage of the data. The reason was that the article might offend the regents of the University of Florida. I did not feel this was a legitimate reason for the paper's rejection, especially as the official editor of the journal had already accepted it. I wrote a strong letter of protest to Kirkland, not asking for reconsideration. I wasn't going to beg, but I complained that this was not a valid reason for rejecting the paper. And some of the older members of the Senate may remember this because my revenge consisted of sending a copy of my letter to every major folklorist I knew. This is before email, unfortunately. That I wanted to let my colleagues know that an acceptance from SFQ did not actually mean that an acceptance might not be nullified at a later date and on such grounds. Needless to say, I bitterly resented this gutless and spineless editorial decision, and I was later pleased that the paper did appear in JAF, a better journal, in 1970. A second encounter with intimidation or censorship resulted from the last time I had occasion to address this very society. It was my presidential address delivered more than 20 years ago, before some of you were even born, at the annual AFS meeting in Pittsburgh, 1980. Now, as many of you know, such presidential addresses are normally routinely published in JAF. So in due course, I sent the manuscript to the editor for consideration. As the presentation was quite long, as I'm sure some of you remember, as I tend to think we're long, as I am today, quite right to send it on to the AFS publications editor. Eventually, I received a rejection letter. The reason for the rejection was not because of poor writing or faulty argument or insufficient data. The reason given was that the research was an insult to members of the Society of German-American Descent. That was the reason why the thing was rejected. Now, I am myself an American of partly German descent. But I did realize that the name of the publications editor, whom I will not name, suggested she herself was of German-American heritage. Now, whether she actually sent it out for review, I don't know. But the point is that even if the work was insulting to German-Americans, that is not an intellectually valid reason not to publish a well-researched paper or monograph. As most of you know, the book was published, but not until 1984. So the AFS rejection surely contributed to a 4-year delay in publication. Thanks a lot. I might mention, that I've actually had essays rejected from not one, but 2 different fest trips. That's hard to do. You reject it from a fest trip, that's a surefire publication that came out of the bottom drawer, it's guaranteed. One of them was for the on the grounds that the essays would offend readers. One was for the Archetype fest trip in Hungary. I had a paper that I wrote, a comparison of ethnic jokes about Jews and Polish Americans. But I got rumors that there was some problem. I was eventually informed by the editors of the volume that there was a pact among members of the Eastern Bloc not to insult fellow members. Hence, it was against Hungarian law to publish any jokes making fun of the Polish people. However, they said, if I wanted to revise my submission, the jokes about Jews could remain. The whole point of the essay was to compare the 2 sets of stereotypes. There's no way I could take out half the paper and have it saved. So I was, of course, very unhappy that this happened, but it was then again published in JAF, which was much better. It's not common to be rejected from Pasteur, as I said, but I did manage it twice. Another occasion was I sent a paper on East European political jokes to East European Quarterly, which is the top journal in East European Studies. It was in Colorado. And it was rejected. The editor said, yeah, I know these jokes, they're certainly traditional. He says, but they might offend readers in East European countries, and that they would cancel the subscriptions. Probably something to that, but still, I think this kind of censorship is, of course, it wasn't a folklore journal, but still, it was bad. Then even, and my dear friend Felix Reines, whom I love dearly, I was asked to submit something to his fest trip, and I sent another article on political humor, and they rejected it because they wanted the book to go to Russia, and they said the Russians might take offense if I had articles with political jokes in it. So and they wanted me to send another article, and I wasn't going to do that. So I was left out of the UNS fest trip. But this is the problem. People are always trying to tell you you can't do these things, and it's going to offend somebody. Too bad. My latest encounter with would-be intimidation occurred in my most recent research efforts. I never learn, I guess. When I applied a folkloristic theory, oral formulae, to the Quran. Now, I was advised by colleagues both here and abroad not to carry out the study. So I asked them, what do you think about my doing this? They said, don't do it. They all said the same. It's not safe, they told me. By reading my completed application of this oral formulae theory to the Quran, one trusted colleague said, of course, I was absolutely right in my analysis, but it just was not politically correct to have done it. In the Islamic world, it turns out that applying any theory previously employed in the analysis of secular data, You cannot take that kind of theory and apply it to the Quran, because then it would make the Quran analogous or comparable to the secular stuff. So you can't use any, there's no higher criticism of the kind that we have in our Judeo-Christian religious writings. So the Islamic world says you can't do it. In the West, scholars theoretically could do it, but they wouldn't do it because they didn't want to offend their colleagues in the Islamic world. As a result, the Islamic scholars don't do it, and the Western scholars didn't do it. So it was left to a non-Islamic folklorist to go ahead and do it. Now, censorship is one thing, but self-censorship is, in my view, a form of academic cowardice. And I've spent much of my career resisting attempts at intimidation, which might lead to self-censorship. And I don't, in my career, I've never been afraid of offending. I may have done so today, for all I know. But I hope I have. Whether the group in question consists of football players, Germans, or Orthodox Jews, it makes no difference. My credo, folklore, is to be analyzed as best I'm able to, and let the chips fall where they may. And on the day when I become afraid of making analysis that some may find distasteful or offensive, I'll know that I'm on my deathbed. I hope that this survey of gloom and doom is not taken as discouragement by younger folklorists. Yes, the decline of folklore programs is worrisome, and the inroads made by amateurs and talkative users to be condemned, and the loss of knowledge and intimidation by informants to be deprived. But all is not lost. There is as much folklore in the world as there ever was, and the challenge of collecting and analyzing has never been less exciting. When Carol and I visited the Baltics this past summer, I was greatly encouraged to see the tremendous folkloristic energy at the University of Tartu in Estonia. And I believe that Estonia is well on its way to rivaling its neighbor Finland as the prime mover of folklore scholarship in the world today. And Latvia and Lithuania are also major players in contemporary international folkloristics of the 21st century. I find the enthusiasm for folklore and the high levels of folklore scholarship in these countries very encouraging. In my forthcoming 4-volume set, Concepts Folklore, published I think next month by Routledge, and if you get it's for libraries only, it's like $700. But if your library's ordered before January, you get a couple $100 off. I have not hesitated to draw upon the superior folklore scholarship from the Baltics as well as Finland. Folkloristics is certainly not dead in those areas of the globe. Richard Dorson ended his classic American folklore with the sentence, quote, "The idea that folklore is dying out is itself a kind of folklore." Now, I don't very much approve of his use or misuse of the word folklore in the latter part of that sentence, as an indulgence in the all too prevalent stereotype meaning of folklore as fallacy or error, since he clearly believes that the idea that folklore is dying out is false. But I think the sentiment may be just as applicable to folkloristics as it continues to be when asserted. If the initial assumption of folklore research is based on the disappearance of its subject matter, there is no way to prevent the science from following the same road. I wrote that in 1972. You're probably going to eat those words if things don't improve to the pen. But folklore is not vanishing. On the contrary, folklore continues to be alive and well in the modern world, in part due to the increased transmission via email and the internet. So the idea that folkloristics is dying out is simply not true. Or to paraphrase Mark Twain, charter member of the American Folklore Society, reports of folkloristics' death have been greatly exaggerated. So as my last hurrah, let me conclude with hurrah for folklore, hurrah for folkloristics, and hurrah for the American Folklore Society. Thank you very much.
Alan's willing to take a question or two, if you're willing to ask.
Alan, you got anything to say about memes?
About?
Memes, M-E-M-E-S?
I've seen it in print.
Ah,
That's all I can say about it.
sort of the new archetypes.
They've had different terms for these, it's like mythemes that Levi Strauss tried to use. Whatever you call it, it's still, figment of somebody's imagination. And I think we folklore should be on guard against these, and I think we should rebut these things, and not let these people dictate what our field is. Yeah, anybody else? Yeah.
I have kind of a comment, which is that, and really from the first part, and first I should like to say that I enjoyed your talk very much. I thought you said a lot of very insightful things that we needed to hear. I did have a little concern about your talking about grand theory. First of all, I'm denigrating some of the theory that some of you should use, but that's not the issue here. When you talk about two superstitions, you apply grand theory and gave some grand theory interpretations of these, but I think that there are also sort of more simple and obvious explanations for certain superstitions. The whistling on board a ship comes from the days, of course, of wooden sailing vessels, and may come, I'm not sure of this, from naval vessels, where certain highly stylized commands, particularly involved in the maintenance of hierarchy, were given by means of a whistle. So whistling on board ship could have been seen as a way to circumvent authority, could be seen as a confusing act that would trouble the hierarchical system. In terms of Jewish superstition about stitching on a button, you can always be worried that the guy with the needle is a shamil. Could be a shamazel. And as the Jews say, if you prick us, do we not bleed? Grand theory, or the grand theory, to explicate certain aspects.
Well, I think that's fine. When I was in the Navy, thank you for your comment. When I was in the Navy, of course, you do have the bosun's pipe that indicates what goes on during the day, but no human whistle could possibly be confused with the sound of the bosun's pipe. And I think I think these are actually both the superstitions that involve beliefs in sort of supernatural power. They're not trivial everyday things. When I was chastised on board ship for whistling, it was clear that it was a tradition that you don't whistle on board ship, and that requires an explanation. I don't think yours is any more persuasive than the Fraserian application of the Fraserian principle.
I would agree. If I could add one little thing to that, in the days of wooden sailing ships, no wind could be just as deadly as too much wind. So the explanation would be a lot more convincing if there were a superstition that you whistled when there was no wind and didn't whistle when there was wind. But it just never.
Well, we need to look at how respects folklore of the sea and some of the other people who study maritime folklore to see if there's such beliefs. Yeah.
The whistling for wind shows up, I mean, that's well known, that shows up in Arthur Ransom's, one of his early books about kids in England saying,
Yeah, no, I think that people do. I think it's clearly Fraser's notion that the whistling, the act of whistling is a microcosm, a miniature of the act of a wind blowing. I think that is helpful. But that's fine. I was only using these as examples. You don't need to care whether you accept them. The point is, otherwise we have Whalen Hands, volume 6 and 7 of the Frank C. Brown collection with umpteen thousand superstitions, or Hyatt's Superstitions from Adams County, Illinois, the largest collection in any one county. Well, you've got 3,500 superstitions with no context. And I remember when I went to UCLA 8 years ago as a visitor, the big project, sorry about this, before you were there maybe even, the big project for the summer was they were changing from 3x5 cards to 4x6 cards. I swear to God, this is true. That was really photocopying 3x5 to put them on 4x6 cards. There's still no more information on the 4x6 than there were on the 3x5. There's still just these long lists of superstitions. No context. We don't know what male or female, old or young. No meaning, no context. And this is what most of the books at the bookstores, if you look at them, are just collections of tales with no analysis, no anything. And this is our field. This is what we're, you go to these other, if you look at the physics section or the chemistry section, or even business and economics at bookstores, there are real books there with that are intelligent analyses of the subject matter. You go to the folklore section, you've got half Jung, half Campbell, and half Roger Abrams' tales retold. Sorry about that. You're not here.
veto was probably in the late 60s, early 70s, and as of 2004, I can attest that idea of allowing veto is no longer part of the training of young folklorists.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that, because I think that some people are intimidated. You get people to, you say, this is wonderful data. I remember one, there are cases. I remember once Tom Johnson, who was here earlier, he came back from the field in Japan. He said, I've got fantastic data on how my informants cheated on their income tax. I said, now that's really interesting. I said, that would make a wonderful article. What do you think of publishing that? And he said, well, he said, it's obvious because they could, the Japanese IR equivalent of the IRS could, they knew who I lived, but they knew who my informants were. They could go check their income tax returns. So there's certainly a case where you have to conceal the identity of your informants and so on. But that doesn't mean that you refuse to publish it or that you refuse to analyze it. Otherwise, we're left with, again, we're butterfly collectors still. And that's no way. Elliot.
Yeah, your criticism of Joseph Campbell, I think there are probably more trenchant criticisms you can make of him that don't rely on genre confusion. But my real question is, when you went to this Mythic Imagination conference or whatever it was called, did you criticize Joseph Campbell?
My paper was called Joseph Campbell, A Curious Case of Misunderstanding. They did not volunteer to publish it. Let's put it that way. But there was a big crowd for it. There's some people that actually wanted to hear it. Although I got a lot of phone calls from the organizers saying, this is an homage to Campbell. They were actually once. I said you invited the wrong person. He would turn over in his grave. But they said no. We want all points of view. The man who invited me was subsequently discharged from the organization. I never found out why. I didn't ask. It was a very strange. You talk about interesting meetings. The highlight was a man dressed as Pan with goat dressing on his feet, posing for pictures in the lobby with people who wanted to pose. And the exhibits were unbelievable. They were talking about New Age. I mean, it was something to behold. I can't tell you how upsetting it was. But there were hundreds of people. It was as big a meeting as this. There are a lot of Jungians out there, a lot of Campbell people. So they outnumber us. Yeah. Yes. Oh, Charles, go ahead. Charles, then you.
I actually really agree with the ethical point of giving your informants the right to decide whether they want to be part of a project and having that feedback. And I see the problems that you're pointing out, but I don't see that it would limit critical research. I have an issue going on right now in my research where one of my participants is really not going to like my interpretation, but I give her the right to withdraw from the project, and that's not going to compromise my interpretation. I still have material from other people who are enthusiastic about my interpretation, and it doesn't compromise the kind of critical questioning to at least give her the choice about whether she wants to be in my.
Well, I agree. I don't think you should force anybody to be an informant or to tell you. And if you can ask them, is it all right if I quote you?
Right, but the direction of the research didn't go that direction until after the field work was over. So she already agreed to participate, but she hasn't agreed to give sanction to my particular interpretation, which is highly charged with my personal subjectivity.
But are you going to publish this thing, or if you can?
Yes, but I don't know.
Will you show it to her or not?
I'm in the course of showing it to her, and it's quite likely that she'll withdraw from the project. But that's not going to inhibit the interpretation. It's just going to prevent her being in a book being presented in something that she considers offensive.
I think that's fine, but you're not disagreeing even with the point over here. It's not inhibiting you, that's fine.
The scholar you mentioned, I actually find incredibly inspiring with the forging new ground in ethical questions.
I just don't think we should have our hands tied. I mean, the whole point of being a folklorist is to analyze folklore, not to please our informants.
I agree.
And that was what I was objecting to. Oh, Charles, you want to say something?
First of all, one thing that's very important is to do the folklore of the state, to actually get people in the power and to be able to record the sorts of narratives that they use that actually are some of the basis of policy decisions. Often, they don't like one's analysis or even the opinion of those sorts of their narratives. And that's an extremely important point, because one must publish those narratives, even if these are extremely powerful people, in the way in which this can actualize power. But I have a little anecdote and a question. I was actually flown to Washington to be the advisor for the Joseph Campbell series.
Thanks for the Krispy Kreme.
And at the first meeting, I said, what you've got to do is fine, you're going to do this, but you have to hire professional folklorists to talk about other perspectives on these materials. And I was never invited to another meeting. Will you ever speak to me again?
Yeah, well, I wish I'd known this before the...
I
I just wanted to mention that as a graduate student, I had a chance to interview Joseph Campbell, and he said that the very first article he wrote, The Flight of the Wild Gander, he sent to JAF, and it was rejected, and he decided at that moment that he never would have anything else to do with the field again.
Well, he don't forget, he made the decision not to get a PhD. He taught his whole career at Sarah Lawrence, then you can teach there without a PhD. He was very charismatic. I mean, you got to give him that. He's greater in death actually than in life. He's a real cult figure. It's clear he's a cult figure, but he chose not to be an academic, and yet he wanted his works to be accepted by academics. And he quoted, yeah.
Since you're interested in context, I was wondering about the informants issue, which I think you've been very cogent about in many ways. But when you look at it from a larger historical perspective, the debate that's occurred in more recent times is better than the attitude, I think, that used to exist where, since we're studying you and we know what's best, we don't really have to talk about what we're publishing with you at all. I don't think we want to go back to that.
Well, I'm not sure. Because I indicated that most of the, if you think about the great ideas that we use in whatever analysis we do, these ideas come from Marx and Weber and Levi-Strauss. These are not people who are field workers. They did not check with informants. They had an idea, they had an insight. They let it out there. So I think it's okay. I came up with this notion of oral literary criticism. I think it's fine. We should always ask informants what they think of their material, but we're not limited to that. And in any case, we're not limited to having to please them. I object to the idea that scholarship is a popularity contest.
Are we obligated to tell them we're thinking about publishing what they tell us?
Let me tell you, my philosophy on this is I try to always make the informants co-authors. So, and in a way, it's silly because these people are not often academics and they could care less about having an article on Turkish verbal dueling in JAF. But I've done this all the way through where the informant has a chance to read it and it enriches it because they see things they understand things that I don't understand. So I'm all for informant input. But at the same time, I know that my book on the polio was not popular with all the CNEs. I mean, most of the things I've written have been not popular with somebody, including my wife. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We have dinner and entertainment afterwards.